Nope. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, Tom Laidlaw, the former NHL defenseman for the New York Rangers and Los Angeles Kings. And this is the Laidlaw and Allen Report. We come to you twice a week. And Tom, the first subject I want to talk about is what a spectacular save, and I think spectacular is the right word, that Marc-Andre Fleury made against, of all teams, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Everything imaginable that could go wrong for the Maple Leafs has been. Yeah. Now they ended up getting a goalie who makes, kind of a save of the year. Nick Petan, who, looked like he had an open net and shot the puck in, and Fleury was caught out of position and then dives back and just snags it out of midair. And on social media, like everybody was saying, like, we don't even need to have a contest now for save of the year. That will be it. Like,
I bet you Vasilevsky at Tampa's going to have something to say with that. He'll come up with a big save, but
yeah, well, he'll have some big saves, but not always the best goalie of the year gets the best, most spectacular saves. But I want to talk about that save for two reasons. Number one, I want to talk about where Fleury fits among the top goalies of all time, and then second, just what it means to the struggling Maple Leafs. So let's talk first about Fleury. That was win 450 last night. There's only 7 goalies who have ever won 450 games. If he gets 3 more wins, he passes or ties Henrik Lundqvist for 6th on the all-time win list. And yet I get the impression that Fleury doesn't get the love that other goalies get for his level of success. And Tom, you played in the game. Where do you see Fleury fitting? I mean, obviously he's not there with Brodeur and Waugh and Sawchuk, who are considered the top 3 goalies, but is he a top 10 goalie of all time?
I would say he's not, and I hate saying it because I love him as a player. Like, the last night's save was typical of what I love about Marc-Andre Fleury is that he's such a competitor. He comes with passion to the game. He's the kind of guy that if you're playing, you want him on your team, right? When he's on his game, he's fantastic. But the problem is, as much as his highs are really high, his lows have been really low during his career. It hasn't been like that in Vegas. He's been pretty consistent. But his days in Pittsburgh, it was strange for a guy that seemed to have so much confidence sometimes and play so well. He'd have other times where his game would just fall apart mentally. And again, to me, it was a confidence issue. You see the guys like the Patrick Waugh, you mentioned, and Martin Brodeur, and the way they carried themselves on and off the ice, just confident players, confident men in their abilities. And Fleury, that's the thing that holds him back from being in that top 10 group. I think that he just has had the tremendous highs where he is in the top 5 all time weights that he's played sometimes, but there's been other times where he'd have a hard time putting him in the top 50 goalies in the National Hockey League. He struggled so bad.
Yeah, I do remember that time. There was about a 3-season period with Mark in the playoffs when he just couldn't seem to stop a volleyball or a beach ball. Yep. He had just trouble, and the fans in Pittsburgh turned against him for a while, and then he brought it back together. Give him some credit. I mean, he did sort of pull it together, and boy, he's really been terrific in Vegas in the short time there, and I think he's a top flight goalie. I think his 450 wins are legitimate. I think he's a guy that's won a cup. He's a guy that took a team to the final. I think we're going to have to give him some credit for all those things. But I'm not ready to move him in that top 5 group. But probably, certainly in my mind, he's probably going to end up as one of the top 10 goalies of all time, just because his statistics are going to be so overwhelming. Like, he could end up, he's only, he's only 34. Like, he could win another 150 games,
Yeah. Anyway, and listen, I agree with you on that, but I guess my problem is I look back and say, well, okay, Pittsburgh Penguins, I know they had Murray come along, but if he's that good of a goaltender, Fleury, they've had that look at him all this time, Pittsburgh Penguins have, and they decided to let him go. I know they had to let go somebody, but they decided to let Fleury go. He's kind of like, well, Jesus, was he really that good?
Yeah, but I mean, wasn't that the logical move? Like, Murray was the rising star, and Fleury was the aging star.
But if Fleury was as good, like as he is at his best, if he's constantly that good, then you're saying, okay, well, he's obviously, you can't let him go if he's one of the top 5 or 10 goaltenders all time. But obviously, they saw his struggles and they said, well, geez, what are we getting here with Fleury? Are we getting the best
Yeah.
player, or are we getting the worst player in him?
Yeah, no, and maybe that was the argument, but I thought it was more, thinking back to what it was just the fact that everybody just believed that Murray was going to be the guy, and he could be your guy for the next 15 years, and you didn't know once a goalie hits 31 or 31, 32, and he was approaching that. At that point, you just weren't sure exactly, and obviously they couldn't keep. Both of them. And I think the logic dictated to keep the younger star over the older star. But, I give you your point on that. If it was, I'm trying to think of a good example, Pekka Rinne and Saros, if it had been those guys, would they have, would they have kept Pekka Rinne? Probably. So, maybe there is something there, but.
See, we love Joseph's comment right here. Like, it's all about defensemen, really, is what he
said. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, I mean, oftentimes, I'll give you a good example of that. We'll talk about, my favorite cousin, as you like to call him, Barry Trotz. I was a doubter on the Islanders because I didn't like the fact that they got rid of Robin Lehner didn't get rid of him. They just didn't re-sign him. Yep. And they brought in Varlamov, who I didn't believe in. But, you look at those numbers, and Varlamov and Greiss both have very consistent numbers. And, you can make the case that though both those goalies are performing well, that it's really been the defensive system. Yep. I mean, their numbers are so similar. That's the way it looks. So, I get that there's defense that plays a big role in determining how good goalies are. I think everybody kind of understands that. I think save percentage, there's some coaches say to me all the time, well, save percentage sometimes is a team statistic more than it is a goalie statistic. Cool. Yeah, maybe. But I find it curious that the top goalies every year, no matter what team, like a good example is Roberto Luongo. No matter what team he was on, he was a very consistent save percentage goalie. So I think there is something to that. So anyway, that was number one. But I also wanted to talk about again, and we keep talking about this because this is an important issue, is the reflection of what that save meant for the Toronto Maple Leafs. It meant, they could have tied that game. Instead, they lost that game because Vegas got an empty net goal. And now they've lost 6 in a row. I think they're 0-5-1 since Marner's injured. And it just keeps getting worse for the Maple Leafs. And, so much discussion about now whether Mike Babcock is the right coach. And both you and I are hearing that they're going to keep him. Yeah. And I know some other prominent journalists have said the same thing, that they're not in the thinking about changing the coach. What's that say about the Maple Leafs organization, Tom?
Well, my guess is if I'm the general manager and the president there, I'm saying to myself, all right, we've got a young hockey team here that clearly is not playing well enough. Now, that we have been critical of Mike Babcock, and I think deservedly so. I just don't think he's doing a very good job of getting that team ready to play. But it isn't all coaching. Like I've said over and over, the coaches get too much credit when they win, and they get too much blame when they lose. The players have to ultimately go and play, and they're not getting it done right now. So if I'm the general manager, I'm saying if I now fire the coach, it's like I've said to the players, okay, that's your crutch. The coaching was the problem. It's not you guys. Instead of them saying, no, guys, they should be having, I'm assuming they're doing it currently. They're having meetings with the players saying, guys, listen, let's be upfront. There's all of these rumors flying around about Mike Babcock getting fired. He's not going to get fired. You guys need to figure it out as a team here. You need to do your jobs. You need to work harder, whatever it is that they think is a problem. So I'm assuming that's the choice to make, because that's a tough market. The expectation is to make the playoffs and win a couple of rounds this year for that team. So I think they're saying, all right, guys, Mike Babcock is safe here. He is going to be your coach. You guys need to figure it out as players and play better. And I think if that's the case, I think that's an important message to send players, any players, but particularly young players that are that talented that they have in Toronto.
Well, the problem we have here now, too, is with the Maple Leafs is, okay, if you don't change the coach, where do we go? Like we just got to wait for the Maple Leafs to play themselves out of it. That's what the Dallas Stars did. They started out poorly, and they just said, well, we'll just have to get it together. And then Ben Bishop put together a couple or 3 good games in a row, and the team got a little confidence. And now you look at them, and they're among the hottest teams in the league, the Dallas Stars. So I guess that's the argument, but I think in this case, I feel like the players now expect something to happen. If you're not going to fire the coach, then are you going to make a big deal? Are you going to change that defense yet again?
And here's the difference. I think it's a great point with using Dallas as an example. I saw a stat where I think Jamie Benn hadn't scored a goal in the first 13 games or whatever, and now he's on a 5-game point streak. So the difference to me, you got an older team there in Dallas, Pavelski, Jamie Benn, character guys. You don't have that there in Toronto yet. I don't see the leadership there that stands up in that locker room and says, guys, enough is enough. Like even a young player that's doing it, Tkachuk out there in Calgary, supposedly stood up and just publicly said, this is sickening. This isn't good enough in Calgary. We need to do better. I just don't see anybody in that Toronto lineup that's got that kind of jam, that kind of swagger that's going to stand up. That's not Austin. It doesn't seem like that's Austin Matthews' way of doing things. And that's going to be the difference, right? I agree with you. What is going to change there in Toronto? In Dallas, you can see the change coming. Jamie Benn's now starting to score. They've had enough of the losing. They're going to make changes here and do it the right way. I just don't see that there in Toronto. What's going to change?
Yeah, and I think that's an issue there. I don't know whether you can just sort of wait to pull out of it. And the same case, we can talk about the same with the Tampa Bay Lightning. I keep waiting for this team, and I never expected them to win 62 games again. That was just kind of a fluky season, but you knew they were going to be a really good team again, and we just haven't seen that. They lost again last night. They're going into Chicago tomorrow. I'll actually be at that game. But I just can't quite figure it out, and I think the feeling must be in Tampa, because it is a veteran team, that, we're just going to play ourselves through this. We'll figure it out, and then we'll get together. But I think your point is a very good one about the Maple Leafs. These are not the Dallas Stars or the Tampa Bay Lightning. This is a younger team that's kind of trying to sort it all out. There are some veterans on that team, but boy, I think you're reaching a critical stage here with the Maple Leafs. You can say, well, it's still early, and it is. There's 60 games left to be played, or more in some teams' cases. But I think the way things are going in the East there, I think you got to start making a move pretty soon, just for the confidence sake.
Oh, I agree too. Here's why our viewers are so smart. Here's what Brent Bishop had to say. These problems, no Tom Laidlaw, Ron Greschner, Barry Beck, Jan Arison. It actually, I'm very fond of those names, especially my own, but that actually is part of the problem there in Toronto. There is no people like that. There's enough of that, let's say. There's not enough of that grinding. But that's really changed in the National Hockey League now, too. I mean, players are drafted for different reasons. It's a speed game now. And Toronto clearly has made a decision to put together a skilled, speedy hockey team. It's not that heavy team that St. Louis has got. So, I'm with you. You and I have talked about it. I think the move has got to be changing the coach, because nothing else is going to change there. And this season is going to go down the tubes if they don't do something. But like we said, from all we're hearing, that is not the case. And if it is, I guess you got to look at the positive side of it. They are saying, like I said before, you can't send the message to the players that it's somebody else's fault when they're young players like this. You have to be teaching them that you guys are responsible for this team. It doesn't matter who's coaching. You need to go out and do your jobs.
Yeah. Well, and even though we've moved to a speed game now, you still need, and this is what Alex Ovechkin and Drew Doughty and even Mike Babcock has said, and what people talk about all the time, is you still need an edginess to your game. And, that's where the Maple Leafs fall short. They just don't seem to have that pushback. They don't have that grit that you need when you got to hold a team to one goal and be able to win a 2-1 game. I just don't know that they're capable of that. And I like their goalkeeper quite a bit. I would take Freddie Anderson over a whole bunch of goalies. So
maybe the real problem is then isn't the coach. Maybe it's they haven't put the right team together. They haven't got the right pieces.
Well, but they made the reason why I think the coach in this case, why I think the sophisticated fan base in Toronto thinks that he needs to pay the price is, they changed it all up in the off season, and it still hasn't helped.
Right. But do they have the right? Yes, they made changes. No. Was it the right changes?
No. Well, I agree with you. I don't think they have the right people there. Right. But you can't change all 6 defensemen. So you're going to have to do something. And we've talked about this before. The fact that where a coach can make an impact, in for a National Hockey League team is in the defensive play. You know, defensive play oftentimes is a system. It's strategy.
But and you know what, Kevin, you're right. It is system and strategy, but I think it's also the players have to be the kind of guys that are willing to make that commitment, because you're kind of sacrificing a part of your game, right? It really doesn't have to be that way. You can still be a good offensive player, but now you're saying, okay, I'm going to block shots more. I'm going to chip the puck out more. You know, I'm paying, like the Islanders are a great example. They're paying attention to the little details. They're all willing to play the role that they're put into there, and it doesn't seem like that's clicking right now. And again, is it just young players finding their way? I mean, I use the line all the time with Herb Brooks. It was kind of funny when he came in to coach the Rangers. It was my second year in the league, and it was before our first game. It was a practice here in Rye, and he was going around the whole team after practice telling everybody, you know, Barry Beck, here's your role. Ron Greshner, here's your role. And he got to me and he said, Laidlaw, when you get the puck, give it to somebody else. You're not supposed to have it. It was kind of a rough way to send a message to me, and the guys got a real kick out of it. And that was Herb's way of doing things. But he was sending a message to me what my role was. My role was to move the puck up quickly, and not try to do so. If I now was going to go try to do something else, I wasn't going to fit into Herb Brooks' system. So it was clear I had to make a decision how I wanted to play the game, and it worked out well for me. But that's the case, you know, with Toronto right now. They've got to figure out what everybody's role is. Teams like the Islanders have figured that out. Here's our role, and we're going to be successful if we're all willing to play our role.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to a different topic. I wanted to talk a little bit about Patrick Kane today, Tom. And here's my thought process. You know, this year he's off and playing well again. 11 goals, 17 assists, 28 points. I think the Blackhawks are 6-2-2 in their last 10. They didn't win last night, but they're playing okay. And I just think first that Patrick Kane has been one of the more consistent scorers in the National Hockey League. Listen to his last 6 years: 29 goals, 27 goals, 46 goals, 54 goals, 27 goals, 44 goals, and he's on a pace for another 40-goal season. And it got me thinking about where Patrick Kane is going to end up among the top American players of all time. And I look at Patrick Kane, and he's now got 3 Stanley Cup championships. And those 3 Stanley Cup championships, he played a extremely important role in all 3 of those. He's won an Art Ross trophy. He's won a Conn Smythe trophy. He's won a Hart trophy. He's won a Ted Lindsay trophy. He was on the silver medal, gold medal team in 2010 in Vancouver. Like, he's pretty much done it all. Right now, I think the 3 greatest players in American hockey history are Chris Chelios. That's my pick to be number 1. Brian Leetch, who was a puck-carrying defenseman, and probably Mike Modano, who is the points leader among the American players. When it's all said and done, is Patrick Kane going to be the greatest American player of all time?
Well, certainly if he keeps going at the pace he's going and plays another 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it is, it'd be hard to not have him at least in that top 3. That's for sure. I mean, I'm a huge Brian Leetch fan with the Rangers here, and a Chris Chelios fan for the way he played, how long he played. But you know what I really like about Kane too is that, like, obviously that skill, and like you mentioned, the consistency of scoring, but the evolution of him as a person, as a player too. Like, he's really, whether it was accurate or not when he was younger, there was that immature kid that wasn't paying attention, wasn't concentrating during great games. It didn't look like, that was the perception you had of him. And now I see this guy that I think did he go over to the World Championships and actually kind of like take a leadership role and lecture everybody how they should be coming over here playing for the country. Like that wasn't Patrick Kane when he first started, right? He evolved into something entirely different. That's pretty impressive. I mean, people always mature and everything. All players have done that. I remember Marilyn Mew or Steve Yzerman, weren't really, competitive guys as much early in their careers, and they developed into really competitive guys at the end of their careers. So that always happens. But I really love watching that with Kane, where he now has become that consistent player. Like when you watch them play, like, it seems like every shift that he's out there, he is really concentrating on trying to make something happen. He doesn't take many shifts off. To me, that's like that leadership role, maybe more of a quiet leader. But I love him as a player, and you're right. I mean, it'd be hard to argue against him, hard to argue against Leetch, hard to argue against Chelios, all that. But I love him as a player. Yeah,
I think your point about compete level, I really like that. It reminds me of I did a story about the last time the U.S. team of NHLers went to the Olympic Games, and I was writing about Patrick Kane, and I actually talked to Ken Hitchcock about him because obviously he's coached against him for a long time, and we were talking about his skill level, and he goes, to me, that's not what makes the most dangerous. Hitchcock told me that what makes Kane dangerous is just what you said, is how hard he competes. Like Hitchcock basically said that he considered him among the most difficult competitors in the league at that time. He just said, you watch him every shift and he's trying to score. Like he doesn't take shifts off. Totally. And I think when you look at when the Blackhawks started to bottom out a couple of years ago, Kane didn't. Kane was not part of the problem in Chicago when they started to fall. He was still doing his thing, competing hard every shift, and so forth. Even in periods when Jonathan Toews has had periods.
That's a good point. That's an excellent point. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Kane has still been there, so yeah. I like that. Those guys at the top there, though. I'm such a Chelios fan, and full disclosure, I wrote Chelios's book with him. I know him reasonably well, but if you look at, I think the American players see Chelios as kind of the godfather. Yeah. And I think Brian Leetch was more skilled by far than Chelios, but even I bet Leetch would say when it comes to, being a leader, like there's nobody like Chelios. He came with a warrior mentality, and he never understood. There's great stories from the 1980s where he basically came in and said, all this nonsense about us not being competitive, forget all that. I come to win. I don't come to compete. Yeah. So I that's the only reason I give him an advantage. And he did everything. Chelios was pretty good offensively, not Brian Leetch good, but he was pretty darn good. And he also
that kind of tailed off late in his career, but you're right. People remember the early part of his career; he was really good offensively. Yeah.
That's right. And then you factor in the longevity and so forth. And then Modano obviously was just a highly skilled guy. But another guy that I think should be at the top of that list that doesn't get enough credit because he ended up with 530 goals or somewhere around there is Keith Tkachuk.
Yeah.
I like the fact that not only was he a great goal scorer, but he was a power forward, and he kind of changed the scope of the American program, him and Billy Guerin, because before them they really didn't have those guys who could go into the corner and come out with the puck. Yeah. And then Guerin and Tkachuk kind of changed that. So that's the American thing. But I do think when it's all said and done, we'll be talking about Patrick Kane being probably the greatest American player of all time until somebody else moves past.
Jack Hughes.
Or Austin Matthews or somebody. We'll have to see how that all goes. All right. Another topic here that I wanted to get into is the Arizona Coyotes, Tom. I think I just wondered whether, because we've seen this before, the Coyotes playing well. Usually it's at the end of the season, and then we say, are they going to come back and play well at the beginning? And then we've been disappointed. But this Coyotes team, 13-7-2 now, they're leading the NHL in goals against average, which to me is really speaks to why they've been so successful. But I think it goes to Rick Tocchet's coaching. I think he's making them play with an edge. He's giving them a playing style that I think works in today's NHL. And it's been their goaltending. Darcy Kemper, 1.85 goals against average, and Ranta. He's played fewer games, but he's right there at 922 as well. And I think we have to give John Chayka, who gained notoriety by being the youngest NHL or any general manager in any sport, and he's made so many trades. But he's brought in Schmaltz, who's their leading scorer. Connor Garland is scoring for them. He made a big trade to get Phil Kessel, and while his numbers aren't spectacular, I think he's really helped them. He adds a dangerous player to the lineup. He drafted Clayton Keller. There's just a lot of good moves he's made. But should we believe in these Coyotes?
Absolutely, yes. I agree with you. I think Rick Tocchet has learned a lot about coaching. He started off in Tampa, didn't work out for him. Then he learned a lot in Pittsburgh when he was assistant there, and I think he's brought what he's learned to the Phoenix Coyotes, and that is that team structure. And it is interesting to me when I look at Phil Kessel. And you're right, his numbers aren't fantastic, but his reputation going back to the Toronto days, or even go back to Boston, was he wasn't this competitive guy. The rumors were he was the last guy on the ice for practice and the first guy off, all those kinds of things. But isn't it funny how the places he goes now? He goes into Pittsburgh and they win 2 Stanley Cups. He arguably could have been the MVP of the playoffs that one season in particular, a real competitive guy. And now he's going into this situation here where you kind of thought, well, geez, if he's this really bad guy, like if he isn't that hard a worker, is he going to drag the rest of the guys down, especially some of the young kids? But that hasn't happened at all. To me, it says a lot about him that it isn't just him, but I'm just thinking it's interesting how he's evolved into another guy that is, maybe a little bit more quiet, but kind of that competitive guy as well, and helps teams to win now instead of helps teams lose. So, but I like Phoenix a lot. I think you're right. They've been patient there. They have had their struggles for the last 2 or 3 years, getting to where they think they should be, but they're there now, and they are a legitimate hockey team. I think they're a contender. They make the playoffs. They're one of those teams that you want to be afraid of playing them in the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Oliver Ekman-Larsson has always had really good offensive numbers, but his plus minus has always been brutal. Right. And this year, I just looked, and his offensive numbers are down. But boy, his plus minus is strong. And I've heard that he's been playing a little better brand of hockey. And I wonder if this is just a player who's kind of learned that you can have more success and more glory if you play more of a two-way game.
Yeah. He get more done by doing less, right? I'm sure Tocchet has said that to him. Listen, we don't need you up the ice all the time. We need you back playing defense a little bit more. That's going to help the plus minus, and it may hurt the points totals, but it helps the plus minus. Yeah. Yeah,
and Alex Goligoski has had a good season. They've got a lot of guys that are playing pretty well, and I agree with you. I think they're the kind of team that you tend to take lightly, and then the next thing could they be this year's Carolina Hurricanes?
Sure. Yes. Absolutely.
Where suddenly they just keep playing well, and you can't kind of think, well, they're just kind of, they're having a good regular season, and then we'll see what happens in the playoffs. Well, we saw what happened in the playoffs with the Carolina Hurricanes. Yep. It just all continued. Yeah. So I like what you're saying on that. And then you wanted to talk a little bit about spitting.
Spitting too. Real quick, one thing I was touching on as we were talking. Did you get a chance to watch the induction ceremonies of the Hockey Hall of Fame the other night?
I did not, but
it was a classic. So I was very fortunate at the early part of my first year, actually. Vaclav Nedomansky was here with the Rangers, and he got inducted into the Hall of Fame. One of the nicest men I've ever met in my life, in hockey or outside of hockey. Just a tremendous man, a gentleman, just a fun guy. Like you meet him, you go, come on. He's one of those things you can't really be that nice a guy, and he is. He is that kind of guy. But I guess I missed his speech, but apparently he had gotten up to make his speech and forgot to thank his wife and a couple of other people, but particularly his wife. So when Haley Wickenheiser got up there, they must have said something to her. So she stepped away from the stage. First she said, listen, Vaclav, I understand you have a few words you want to say. So she stepped away, let him get back up on stage and thank his wife. It was really classy by Haley Wickenheiser to do it. And he was so funny, he's got like a little bit of broken English, and he felt so bad, particularly about his wife, and he was thanking her over and over. It was kind of emotional and funny at the same time. It was a pretty nice scene though, so it was good.
I love that story. Nedomansky, as someone who grew up in Detroit, I saw him when he came over. It was and you could tell, even though he was at the end of his career, the skill. And I did a lot of research about him at that point in time, and I realized that the man had been one of the world's greatest players. Like his best work had been done much before he got to the NHL, much like Igor Larionov. Now, Igor Larionov, when he got to the NHL, was still a darn good player, and Nedomansky was good too. But I don't think people who saw him in the NHL have got any indication of how dominant he was on the world stage. And there's a great kind of legendary story in international hockey of after the tanks rolled into the Czech Republic in '68, the Russian tanks rolled in, that the Russians and Czechs played an international game at the Olympics, and I believe it was '72. And Nedomansky supposedly fired pucks into the Russian bench on 2 occasions to register his protest for what had gone on there. So, a lot of respect there for that man too. And again, drawing comparison to Igor Larionov, who stood up to Viktor Tikhonov, the only guy did. Yeah. One of my favorite moments is I interviewed Fetisov about Larionov, and Fetisov told the story of the courage that Larionov had standing up to the Soviet regime, and tears formed in his eyes as he started talking to me about Larionov and just what a courageous man. We throw that word courage around like, oh yeah, he's courageous for coming back to, playing with injury. Well, it is, it takes a lot of gumption to come back and play with some injuries, but real courage is the kinds of things like, Nedomansky did and, what Larionov did. And we should be careful when we use those words.
No, totally.
Anyway, you've been listening to the Laidlaw and Allen Report. We've run out of time. It always moves way too quickly. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week, guys.